Okay, grade 12. So I'm going to quickly run over some important things when it gets to writing harmony. So let's just quickly revise a couple of basic principles. So the first thing that I would like to say is, remember, you always have to check your key before you start harmony. Okay, and then of course you need to figure everything, you need to indicate the key, you need to indicate the chords correctly. Just remember that the quality of the chords differ in the majors and in the minors. And then of course remember to indicate your chord positions. So is it root position, is it first position, what position is it? So that needs to be included in your figuring. Then the next thing is that you need to check your voice ranges when you write your harmony. So on the board you'll see that I wrote the voice ranges of the various voices. So of course at the top you have your soprano, and then you have your alto, tenor and bass. Your soprano and alto, I hope you know that it's written in the treble clef. And then your bass and your tenor voice is written in the bass clef. Okay, so let's quickly have a look at the voice ranges. So the soprano, so these are really the maximum voice ranges. Perhaps your the voice ranges your teacher gave you might be slightly different, you stick to that. But I try to make it actually quite easy to remember. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so for the soprano, from middle C to the A, the alto, from the F to the D, and then if you look at your tenor, it's from the B to the G, and then your bass is from the E to your middle C. And if you use this, what's nice about it is you can see the placement on the staves are the same for the soprano and the bass. Okay, so it's easy to remember and it's easy then not to make a mistake. And for the alto and the tenor, they sort of swap. Okay, it's almost like a mirror image. Okay, so if you look here, it's the third line below the staff to the second line from the top, and then it's basically just inverted here, second line from the bottom up to the third line above the staff. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so that's your voice ranges, and then also just remember the maximum distance between your voices. So between your soprano and your alto, not more than an octave, and between your alto and your tenor, also not more than an octave, and then between your tenor and your bass, not more than a tenth. Now, it's also possible to go up to a 12th, but if you're playing piano, you would know that that's quite a stretch. Okay, so that's why I think it's better to try and limit and keep it within a tenth between the tenor and the bass. Okay, now the next thing that you need to be aware of is your voice leading. So your voice leading is basically the way the voices move together. So the rule of thumb there is you always try to avoid big leaps, okay, as far as possible. The voice that normally contain most leaps is the bass. It doesn't mean that you can't have other leaps or leaps in other voices. They will be there. But what you should try is just to limit it. So you can limit it by trying to keep notes where two chords have the same notes in common. You try and keep those notes in the same voice. Another thing that you can also do is you can consider changing the inversion of a particular chord, and then also you can try and change the doubling. Of course, it goes without saying you need to know your doubling rules, and I have emphasized this in the past as well. Okay, and then the next thing is that please remember that you are not allowed to have parallel fifths and octaves. So what that means is that, say for example, you have the interval of an octave between the bass and the soprano. Now you move to another octave between the bass and the soprano, and that is going to give you a parallel octave. Okay, and but it needs to be between the two, the same two voices. Having said that, if you look at this example here, you'll see I've got a G and a D and a G and a D. So if the fifth repeat on the same two pitches, then it's fine. That's not considered to be a parallel fifth. Okay, so that is your parallel fifths and octaves. Maybe a good thing that I can also just add there is one of the ways to try and avoid it, it's not 100% bulletproof, but especially if you triple, say for example, the root, then you need to be careful. But a good principle to use is, if you have a fifth between whatever two voices, try and see in the next chord if that can't become the octave in that particular chord. So it's just a way to try and limit it. Okay, then the next thing is, remember your voices are not allowed to cross. So on the board I'm going to focus a bit more on this example just now, but I'm going to show you what I mean by voices that are not allowed to cross. So in this example, the soprano is given, and that's why it's written, the notes are written in blue. And you can see my soprano, I've got an E, and then it moves to an E there. And then in the alto, I've got a G sharp, and it moves to a B. So my alto and my soprano is basically crossing there. So in other words, my soprano moves below my alto, and that's not allowed. Okay, so that is basically crossing. Then let me just see, there are so many things that one needs to keep in mind, and it's such a short revision, so I really just try and make sure that I cover everything here. Okay, then the next thing, and the last thing before I move over to this example, is whenever there's a chord which is repeated, please don't be lazy and copy and paste everything from chord to chord, okay? So at least change the doubling, change the inversion, so that it's not exactly the same. Okay, so I thought the best way to show you what you should avoid and what bad harmony looks like is, I wrote an example on the board of bad harmony. So let's have a look at it. The example is in A minor, and if you look at the first chord, so it's chord 3, which is augmented, so that is C, E, G sharp. Okay, so it's an augmented chord, and with an augmented chord we normally double the third. If it's not possible because we get fifths or octaves, we can also consider doubling the root. Okay, so let's just quickly check there. So I'm going to look at the doubling. So I have C, E, G sharp. Okay, so nothing wrong with the doubling. However, I've got the G sharp, which is my leading tone, and the leading tone needs to move to the tonic, or in this case it's still okay, because you have a chord 3 moving to a chord 5, so it's in the same function, just as long as the leading tone in your second chord resolves correctly. So we have a chord 5 moving to a chord 1, and then because of that my leading tone will have to resolve upwards to the tonic, which is not the case. So I specifically made this mistake, that you can see it seems like the leading tone is resolving to the A, but it's actually not, because it's in a different voice. Okay, so the leading tone needs to resolve within the same voice. Okay, so that is why there's something wrong with the leading tone there. Okay, then let's just quickly have a look at the rest here. So I've got C, E, G sharp. Okay, so that's fine. I've got my crossing. And like you can see here, that's quite a big leap. So I mentioned the leaps. When it gets to an octave, you can have an octave, okay, but you need to know how to harmonize it, and I will show you how we get out of this situation just now. Okay, now I have chord 5, so it's a major chord, so I would double either the root or the fifth. So I have E, I wrote the chord there for you, so E, that's doubled, and then you can see here I've got octaves. Okay, so it's E in the bass and in the soprano, which then moves to A and A in the bass and soprano, so that is my octaves that I actually have over there. I think did I write this 5 here now? Let me just write the octave there. Okay, and then see E, G, B. I'm just going to check the E, G, B. Oh, and then I've got fifths here. Okay, so I've got E to B. Okay, so E to the B is my fifth, A to the E is my fifth. Okay, and like you can see, it's in the same two voices, so that's why they are parallel fifths. Okay, I'm just going to take a moment quickly and just check if there's anything else. Yeah, there's one other thing here. In the middle voices, it's still okay-ish, but you can avoid it in this particular example. I jump from the B to the E, so that forms a unison. So the voices don't cross, but it's not good to actually leap into the unison. Okay, so it could have been avoided. And of course, I've got another example here of crossing, and that's between the tenor and my bass. Okay, so the G sharp and the A, so the A goes above the G sharp. Okay, so quite a lot of mistakes there. So let's quickly see how we can fix it. So I'm going to keep the same chords. I'm going to keep the same chord position, because then you can see how little I can actually just change and fix it. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So I've got my chord 3, so it's C, E, G sharp, C, E, G sharp. Sorry, I'm a bit skew there. Okay, so what I did here, so this is how you deal with a big leap. You try and counter it with the other voice, and that is exactly what I've done here. So I've countered it by I'm going to have a unison here. So now I have a unison, okay? Even though I leap down an octave, that is fine. It's just not great when you have a different interval than an octave, but an octave is permissible. Okay, so I counted that by putting the E in the alto and doubling it in this voice. Okay, then I have my E, G sharp, B, so I'm going to have my E. So it's root position. I've tripled my root, that is fine, and I hope that you know that you're allowed to do that, and that whenever you triple the root, then you can omit the fifth, but you still have to include the third, because that is the one that distinguishes the quality of the triad, okay, so which makes it in this case major. Okay, so there's my G sharp, and of course, oh sorry, I forgot to put the G sharp here, So we can take away this one. Okay, so remember what I said, you try to improve your voice leading and to try and keep the voices as smooth as possible. You try and keep notes that two chords have in common in the same voice, which is exactly what I did there, and I also did it over there. Okay, then my last chord is my A, C, E, and of course it's a minor triad. I would normally double the C, but let's see. Okay, so I'm going to have my A, and then you see this G sharp, which is my leading tone, needs to resolve upwards to the A, so automatically I have to actually triple my A, and then of course the only note that I still need to include is my third, so I've omitted the fifth. Okay, so I think if you compare these two examples, I think the thing that, well, not think, I know the thing that caused most of the mistakes is actually that I had a lot of big leaps, and that resulted in crossing and parallels and all of that. Okay, and remember, whenever you harmonize, just be mindful of the moment you write an octave or a fifth, that you know, okay, I've written it, it's, say for example, between the bass and the tenor. When I move to the next chord, just check that I don't have either the fifth or the octave, you know, in depending on what I had in the previous chord, in the next chord. Okay, so that's just like a very, very quick recap of all our harmony rules. I trust that it helped you, and that it also reminded you of certain things that you might have forgotten. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the next video clip is I will actually just go through the process of writing and completing a 4-part harmony.